Okay, great. So welcome to this Ruhr Publishers book discussion. I'm Philippa Jefferies and I have with me Arthur Clay, Director of Virtual and author of the River Publishers series Interviews with Innovators, which looks at how practitioners are testing the boundaries between the sciences, arts and humanities. Today we're talking about his latest book in the series on media, on technology, on life, which features 13 artist researchers whose artworks look at the relationships between living bodies, microorganisms, tools, techniques and institutions. Arthur, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the interview.
Yeah, and I guess before we start looking at the book in detail, can you please talk a bit about how this book came about, kind of what inspired the series?
Sure. Well, it's always anything I do is kind of a black swan effect between the different things I have to do in my life. So I would say the book came about through an odd combination of things. On the one hand, many of the artists that I had been working with before using technologies made a shift and really I have no reason and became bioartists. So, and on the other hand, my friendship with Sung-Hoon Kim made it possible to come to a better understanding of what BioArt is and could be, and how we might use it as a subject for an entire festival. So it was kind of a black swan effect, as I said, because a few unexpected things come about and synergize into something new. For example, the fellow artists becoming bioartists and me being in Korea and meeting Sung-Hoon Kim. Those are very important things, even for the first edition where we started cooperating with Sung-Hoon and who is really a great scientist, wonderful person, and above all, someone who's deeply interested in arts and knows what their expression and possibilities are. So that's important to know. So on the one hand, I already knew the first generation of bioartists who defined what bioart is. And on the other hand, I had the ability to attract a newer generation of artists to participate in the BioArt Festival that we set up with Sung-Hoon and the Seoul National University. That's how the book came about, because we combined several generations of buyers into it. And also, we were able to show in the book, what I think is interesting is how over generations BioArt developed, and to explore what the interest came about was several things to kind of define wet media as the new media. Wet media not being paint, but being agar-agar or growth mediums, which allow us to use living organisms as a kind of media in the art. And that would be the new thing. So new media was basically concerned with digital storage possibilities, but the wet media, new media, is concerned about media that is actually alive. So that's how that book came about, I'd say.
Okay, and you had 13 artist researchers which participated, all looking at different things using different techniques. I was wondering if you could just give a couple of examples of the projects that the artists featured. I know it must be hard to choose a few, but yeah.
Yeah, I think 13 is a kind of unlucky number in a funny way, but it's with COVID, I think it's the perfect number, I think, because the book focuses on microbiology and genetics, which I think have been very important in overcoming the pandemic. So,
yeah, of course.
First of all, I guess I don't want to point out any particular artist because I really think they're all great in different ways. Some are incredibly established, some are new. But if we take the 5 chapters, I'll point out maybe 1 or 2 artists, which I think particularly sum that chapter up in a good way.
Okay.
The 5 chapters: microbial assemblages, life containment, life beyond bodies, specular futures, conceptual models. Now, microbial assemblages like Roberta Trenton. Now, this is a person who is not in the traditional sense of bioartist, but someone who is interested in both fields, in photography and working in a lab doing bio work. So she was a lab technician at the same time a photographer, but she doesn't have the research background that most of the bioartists do. But because of this, she has such a warm approach to creating art that it's so convincing. And that's what I think is important with her work, is that it's simply convincing as an artwork. Okay, and microbial assemblages, we're taking microbes in her case from the kitchen, cultivating them and putting them on photos already taken and then watching to see how they mask that photos. The combination of pictures of her family and the microbial growth from the home gives you a really true sense that it's a living culture, like a family developing versus that. So in life containment, Anna Dumitriou, probably one of the best known bioartists that we could cite, she started exploring the use of pathogens for using in dyes. So she would put them in different dyes. They would color and then dry them so they wouldn't be be dangerous or contagious. So she created this wonderful quilt by using this technology. So I think that it shows really kind of like in an archaeological way the kind of the results of how would you say that, what is left from the traces of life. And I think that's really nice, and using living matter as a kind of tool or material for dyeing or creating the art itself. And then the next chapter, Life Beyond Bodies, the Chinese artist Vivian Xu, she's really interested in extending our ability in a kind of a post-human way, humanism plus plus, and that she's developed technologies that interface with biomass like silkworms, training them to move into patterns by electronic impulses, and extending that into the concept of developing a second skin for humans to wear, so they become more sensitive to people's emotion in a visual way. That could be good or bad, but it could be interesting for training and for perceptual uses. So I really think she's done fantastic work, and I knew her as a student. So watching her curve into becoming an established artist has been quite exciting. And then speculative futures, which I think is really important. It's kind of using a new way to platform what might happen in 100 years or 200 years or even in 50. And Paul Gong and Nestor Pastana would be really the two artists that really have done that in a great way. Paul Gong in terms of showing how we might use genetic modification of our microbiome to change the palette of our food sources for eating dead matter, for example, like vultures, I think, and so that the human might be able to survive. And Nestor is exploring on ways to use the human body to develop its own food sources in bizarre and scientific ways. But I think they're really critical pieces that the audience can enjoy as artworks, but at the same time they come away with a much more informed message about genetic modifications and new forms of drugs. And the last one is conceptual models, which exactly is boredom research. So they design kind of within like artificial nature within a computer and let it spin out, and they can see the effects of pollution over 100 years with a kind of an artificial organism which is related to an organism in the real world. So I think those three chapters and those artists are quite good to take a look at.
Yeah, and what I find interesting,
think,
it's not just it's not just taking the results and making some art from it. It's really kind of ingrained in the research process, and
yes,
part of it.
Yes, and I think that's the art of BioArt, is not only presenting an aesthetically appealing or non-appealing artwork, because in BioArt some of the work is, in a way, has an element of disgust in it, but also having the research be the backbone of the work, whether in the creation or the generation of it, but also as part of the message, because in part of the book, the idea is not only to show the art, to show the message, but to show the dynamics between the bioartist, the material used, and also the relationships formed during the creation of the work, the presentation of the work.
Yeah, definitely interesting. And I was wondering if there's anything new, in particular, you learned yourself while compiling this book together.
Yes, well, I have to give credit to my fellow editor, Tim Senior, who is a very established academic, and he felt with such a diverse range of artists, there would have to be a conceptual framework that would unite them all. And I think he was one of the first editors in the beginning book, and he introduced this somewhat later. So he introduced me to two figures. The art historian Robert Mitchell is focused on bioart and the development of bioart in recent years, and the tech philosopher Gilbert Simondon, and both of these persons played a role in providing a fair framework for the interest that would tie them together. And I think this is important in the publication because the challenge here was to use the framework to make the inquiries, but not expect the artist to follow it.
Yeah.
Because artists tend to invent their own approaches to science and technologies and to show the results in an artwork. And I think also, in addition to that, the contrast between the bioartists who've really founded the movement, the genre, versus those who have taken it and extended it. And I think getting to know that was really an eye-opener because the new generation of bioartists create more appealing, aesthetically acceptable works, where the original bioartists and the founding bioartists were really interested in the science and presenting the science in the front. So I think that's a nice shift. And what's interesting, they all get along, which is rare. So because they have this one common factor that they are truly interested in science.
Okay, I'm just interested, why do you think there's been that shift?
That shift, just because the original bioartists established the grounds of working with laboratories, scientists. Before, it was very odd for an artist to walk into a science lab and say, hey, I want to use your stuff to make artwork. And they would say, what? Yeah, I really like these pathogens here, and I want to make them into dyes to make a quilt. I mean, you couldn't formulate it like that. So people like Anna Dimitriou and Sarah Kraska, they had the education and the vocabulary, the abilities and the training to present the creation of art as a valuable part of a research lab, providing some new input, providing maybe a kind of informal atmosphere that was very conducive to people creating conversations of what they want to do. And above all, it made it bioresearch and other areas of research and science publicly possible to understand and to create a differentiated discussion around very important topics such as biotechnologies, GMOs, all these kinds of things. So it's not a yes or no answer. Do we want GMOs? No. But what about targeted DNA medicines, which will save a certain amount of people because they work with a certain number of people and it will cure them, but with the other number of people, it will kill them. So these new technologies have brought about new approaches of creating medicines, drug paths, new vectors. And I think that's really nice if artists are able to point that out and create a differentiated discussion about these things. I mean, none of us want to eat GMO food, but what about taking GMO drugs that will cure us from a particular disease? So we have to have a differentiated discussion on that. And I think bioartists of the first generation enabled the second generation of artists to come into those labs much more relaxed, much more open, and get a reception which the first generations had to work at, had to really earn.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're kind of running out of time, I'm afraid, but just finally, do you have any new art projects or anything interesting coming up soon?
Yes, because all of us were thrown off course because of the pandemic. And so we were thrown into this innovation mode. What if I can't do anything that I did before? So we started working on new technologies that would allow us to do exhibitions, but not lose what we were planning to present. So we're in the process of developing new mobile applications to use the telephone as a kind of a magic wand or a looking glass in order to make static exhibitions more alive. Okay, because we've got to keep 1.5 meters distance. We can't touch or trade any objects. And for the mobile phone, it's a personal thing, right? It's yours. So you don't trade it off, but you can use it as a tool. So you go up to a poster, you scan it in, it becomes alive. You can communicate what you've seen to other people. So it becomes the connecting point between many things. So we develop new applications like that. And those abilities have brought new pieces like music for gongs and satellites, where people can play together in public space by following their telephone score. That's really nice. But I think the most important thing, which I think will come into a new edition of Interviews with Innovators, is the idea of future foods, which we saw in the work of Paul Gong and David Lissel in the present book. And a year ago or so, I set up an exhibition on future foods. And I think it's such an important factor that is going to be the focus of some new artworks, and also creating a new set of artists, or putting a new set of artists together to pursue that subject.
Okay, interesting. I look forward to seeing that new book when it's ready. But thank you so much for joining me today, Arthur.
And thank you for the great questions.
No,
Okay.
that was really
Anyway,
interesting, actually.
well,
Very interesting.
read the book. I think, and if I wanted to say what any other reader would come away from reading the book, it would be summed up in one sentence. The book outlines a certain hope in knowing that human minds are a creative tool, which, when put to work, can address even the greater challenges, the greatest of challenges. So.
Fantastic.